Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy McPeak for NetTuts, and welcome to another lesson of ASP.NET from Scratch. We spent the past few lessons dealing with web forms. Well, today we leave web forms in the dust, and we start with MVC. Now, MVC is a programming pattern that has its roots in a Xerox project in the late 1970s. It divides your application into three parts. A model, which is the M, a V, which is the view, and a controller, which is the C. And you may be asking yourself, well, why should I use MVC? Well, I'll give you two generic reasons, and then we'll look at some specific reasons to ASP.NET MVC. First, MVC fits very well with web applications. The user makes a request, the application responds by changing its data model, and it returns a view to the user. It's a cycle very similar to a web page's life cycle, so they fit very well together. Second, MVC applications mirror the three parts of a web application that are already in use. You have the user interface, which is made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then you have some server-side code, which executes and processes data. That can be ASP.NET or PHP, Python, or Perl, or Ruby, or whatever. And then you have some data store, which is usually a database, but you can use XML files or anything like that. And these three portions of a web application fit very well into MVC because an M in MVC stands for model. That is your business logic and all the logic that's needed to interface with your database. The V, which is the view, is essentially the user interface that uses data from the model to display to the user. And then the controller is kind of the back-end code that kind of manages everything. So the three technologies of MVC are already in use with today's applications, just in a little slightly different way. Now those are just two generic reasons of why you would want to use MVC for a web application. Why would you want to use ASP.NET MVC? Well, for one, it's extensible. A good analogy is your typical computer system. A computer is made up of independent components that work together to make your computer work. But if you want to increase your performance somehow, either graphically with a graphics card, or if you want to upgrade your CPU to a later generation, as long as it fits your socket, you can swap those parts out and get better performance. Well, you can do the same thing with ASP.NET MVC. The model, the view, and the controller, and there's also another component that handles the routing, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But all of these components can be swapped out with other components. So you can either use the default implementation, or you can write a subclass that extends that default implementation to add some customization, or you can completely replace one of those components with one that was written by somebody else. So you're not tied down to what is default in the MVC framework. You can use pretty much whatever component that really fits your coding style. Second, it's testable. The model, the view, and the controller are all pieces that can be independently tested, and in today's test-driven development environment, it fits very well into that. Third, it gives you control over your HTML. Web forms took that away from you. If you used the server controls, you were pretty much bound to whatever HTML those controls output. With ASP.NET MVC, you have something called HTML helpers, and they output very clean HTML, which is a very nice change. Next, view state is gone. Now, we didn't really discuss view state, and that's primarily because I'm not a big fan of it. But what it is it's a feature of web forms that provides state for web application. It does a fantastic job of doing that, but it has a bad side effect of adding more and more data that has to be downloaded by the browser. So even if you don't see that data, it's still being downloaded behind the scenes. So as you use data-heavy server controls, those keep adding more and more data to the view state, which causes the HTML that the browser has to download to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So view state being gone out of MVC is a very welcome feature of MVC. Next, it has an awesome routing system. Over the past few years, we've seen a push for some clean URLs. Not only are they easier to type and remember, but they're key to search engine optimization. URL routing is built into ASP.NET, and the default implementation is pretty nice. There is some server configuration that's required if you are on a older version of IIS, but IIS 7 and 7.5 pretty much don't have any configuration requirements. So if you don't have access to the administrative portions of IIS, if you're on shared hosting, you can handle all of the URL routing from within the MVC application. Also, the default implementation of ASP.NET MVC uses the tried and true features of master pages, ASPX files, and ASCX files. So we are already familiar with those from our previous lessons, and we'll be able to use those same types of technologies within the default version of MVC. There are some new view engines coming out, especially from Microsoft. One's called Razor that completely does away with that, but we will get to that when there is more than just a preview available of MVC 3. Finally, ASP.NET MVC is open source, so you can download the source code, modify it, build it, and run your own version. In fact, that's how all of the third-party components, as far as the view engines and the controllers and some of the models, are being built, is from the source code that is freely available. It's a free download from Codeplex. All you have to do is search for it, and you can download it. So that about sums up all the boilerplate introduction to ASP.NET MVC. So let's switch gears and let's get started with our first ASP.NET MVC application. Okay, so let's start up Visual Web Developer. And we are going to create a new project. It's going to be an MVC2 project. Now MVC2 shipped with .NET 4, so it is built into Visual Studio 2010. There's not any extra download that we have to make like we did with MVC1. We'll leave everything else as default and we'll just click OK. And this is the default template for MVC2 projects. Over in the Solution Explorer, we have quite a few folders here. We have a content folder. Pretty much anything that does not deal with the backend code can go in the content folder. Right now there's just a CSS file, but we can add images or JavaScript or pretty much anything else that we wanted to, as long as it wasn't C# code. Next are our controllers. Our controllers go inside of the controllers folder. Controllers are nothing more than a class. You can see the home controller is open now. Next is the models. Anything that has to do with or does not have to do with controllers or views will go into the models folder. You can see the account models file has quite a few lines of code. We'll actually get rid of that soon. Next is the scripts folder. Microsoft is heavily invested in jQuery, so there are quite a few jQuery files included, as well as some Microsoft files. And next is the views folder, and you can see several subfolders here: account, home, and shared. We'll go over these folders and what they are for here in a little bit. Even though we started with a blank project, let's just start completely over from scratch. Let's delete the CSS file in content. Let's also delete the controller classes inside of the controllers folder. Let's go into the models, delete account models.cs, and let's blow away the entire scripts folder because we don't need any of those. And in the views folder, we want to get rid of the account and the home folders. And we will also go into shared and delete these three files. Now we will, however, leave this web.config file. So let's add a controller. We are going to create the home controller again. We'll right click, add, and then choose controller. It is context sensitive. Since we right clicked on controllers, it knows that we pretty much want to create a controller class. Now when you name your controller class, you have to append the word controller to it. It is a convention of MVC that we do have to follow. So whenever you name a controller, it's going to have the name, which is home, followed by controller. Now in MVC, controllers are responsible for handling incoming requests, and these public methods are called action methods. You can see that this one returns an action result value. Index is the default action of a controller. By calling and returning this view method, what this would do is this would go to the views folder. It would look for a home folder and look for an index view. Since it can't find one, it would throw an error. So we can change this to string. We can change this return value to a string value. And then we will save, and I will press F5 to run it. And as it compiles it and loads it into the development server, we can see that we get hello MVC. If we view the source, that's all that we will see as well. Now there are actually many results that we can return. Right now we're just returning a string, but if we wanted to return JSON, there is a JSON result that we could return. But for the most part, we just want to return a view. So we'll change string back to view result, and then we'll change our string value to calling the view method. Now we don't have a view for this action method, so we are going to right click and choose add view. Notice we don't have a home folder yet, and we do need one, so we'll click add view. This is the add view window. The name of our view is the same as our action method. We don't want a partial view, we don't have a strongly typed view, and we don't have a master page, so we're going to leave everything as default and click add. You'll see that it added a home folder for us, and it added a view called index.aspx. Now that we have a view, let's add some data to it. I'm going to use a data structure called view data. It's really nothing more than a dictionary, so it has key value pairs. I'm going to give it a key of something, and then we'll go to the controller class and we'll use the same data structure. We'll use the same key of something, except that we are going to assign some data here, and I'll just do the same string that we did earlier. Now I will save this and run it. When it renders inside of the browser, it's going to look just like it did previously. But if we look at the source code, we'll see that it's actually pulling in our view. It has all the HTML along with the data that we specified with the view data structure. Okay, so now we have a view and we are passing data to that view. Now there are better ways to pass data to a view, because for the most part we want to pass some complex data to a view, and we will discuss that in a later lesson. Now let's recreate the contact form that we made with web forms. The first thing we want to do is link to our contact form, and we're going to do that by using the HTML class, which has some helper methods. This one is called action link. It creates a link for a particular action. We are going to specify the text of contact me. This is what's going to be displayed in the browser, and then we want to link to the contact action on the home controller. Home is implied here because we are working within the home controller. We could explicitly specify that, but we don't need to. Now if we run this, we will see hello MVC and then our contact me link. Now if we view the source, we'll see that it generated an HTML element for us, the home and then contact. If we click it, we get a 404. That's because we don't have an action method called contact on the home controller, and since that doesn't exist, the server tried to find the physical folder, which does not exist as well. So let's create an action method called contact. It's going to return a view result, and to do that we just we return view. And now that we have an action method, we just need to create a view for this particular action. So let's right click, add view. The only thing we can change is contact, so we'll just click add because we want to name our view the same as our action method. Let's add some text here. within an H1 element, contact me. This way we can see for sure that we are on the contact page. And let's also link back to the index action. So we'll use the action link helper method. We'll say go back home, and we'll specify the index action. Now if we save it and press F5, we will see the first page, the index action with hello MVC and contact me. If we click on the link, we will go to our contact page. If you look up in the address bar, there is home and contact. That's because we are on the home controller. On the index page, that's not there. That's because home is the default controller, the way our routing table is set up, and index is the default action on that controller. Now we can change that later on, but we'll do that in a later lesson. Alright, since we are recreating our contact form, the first thing we need is an actual form. Now there is an HTML helper method called beginForm that we can use to generate a form for us. We're going to use it inside of the using statement. Whenever the ending curly brace is reached within code execution, then the closing form tag will be generated. So everything within the opening and closing curly braces here is going to appear within the form. Now the next thing that we need is some way to tell the user whether or not their email was sent successfully. In the web forms project, we used panels to do that. Well, we don't have panels in MVC, so I'm just going to use the view data structure. I'm going to use a key of success message, and this way we can pass information to our view using this data structure. Now the next thing we need are text boxes. The first one is for the user to input their name. The text box is going to be within a div element, and we are going to use an HTML helper method called textbox. Its first parameter is the name of the text box, so whatever we type for the name will go into the name attribute. The second overload allows us to put the value of the text box, and the third allows us to specify any HTML attributes. We're going to use this third overload. We're going to give it a name of name. It's going to have a value of an empty string, and then we want to give it a CSS class. Now we are going to use some special syntax here. We need to specify a class attribute, but class is a special keyword within C#. So in order to get around this, we're going to prepend class with an @ symbol. This will let MVC know that we want to use this particular string here, and that will render as a string. So this will add a class attribute to our text box element. We're going to do the same for email. We're going to give it a name of email, and it's going to have the same class. And then the next element is going to be a text area. Since we need a text area for the message, we're going to get rid of the text box method, and instead we are going to call the text area method. And we don't need anything special. We're just going to give it a name of message body. Now the next thing we need is a submit button. So we're going to put that inside of another div element, and we're going to use the input element, type of submit, and a value of submit message. Now there isn't an HTML helper method to generate a submit button for us. We can look here with IntelliSense. We can look for button, but the only thing that comes up is radio button, and we can look for submit, but there is nothing for submit. So we're just going to use a simple input element. We need to get rid of object here. Visual Studio added that in for us, which we don't need. And then the next is we need to add the style sheet that we used with our older project. And I'll just add that, and I'll drag it and drop it in. So if we run this now, and if we view our contact form, it's going to look a lot like what it did with our web forms project. So you can see that that looks pretty much the same there. Alright, so we have our form now. It will allow the user to input data and post it to our server. In fact, it's going to post to the contact action method. But wait, we already have a contact action method. In fact, this action method returns this view here. So how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing we need to do is create an overload of our contact method, but still that begs the question how MVC is going to know which overload to use in which situation. Well, we have an attribute called accept verbs, and this will allow us to specify an HTTP request type to attach it to a particular action method. So here we have a get, and now we have a post. So when a get request is made, it's going to call this action method, and when a post request is made, it's going to call this action method. Okay, so we have two contact methods. One responds to get requests and the other responds to post requests. Well, we need to get our information from our form whenever it's posted to this contact action method. Now we're going to use a feature called model binding. It's done automatically for us. All we have to do is create a class. So I'm going to create a class called contact message, and I'm going to add it within our models folder. Now what this class needs are three public properties that match the name, email, and message body text boxes. So I'm going to add a public property of type string called name. I will add another string property that will be called email, and the last property is a string and it is called message body. And again, these have to match the text boxes in our view. So if we go to our controller, we can go to our post contact action method, and it can accept a contact message object, and we need to add the models namespace to our using because our class was created within models. So now we have strongly typed data that we can use inside of this action method. And we will use this object to fill in some information whenever we create our email to send to ourselves. Now the first thing we need is a variable to contain a success or failure message. We'll call this variable success message, and we are using the view data structure within our view to display our success or failure message. So let's go ahead and let's set that here. We'll use the key success message, and we will give it the value of the success message variable. Now of course we will change the value of this variable in case if something fails whenever we try to send this email. We are going to use the mail message class within the system.net.mail namespace. We'll call this email, and the first thing we will give it is a subject, and we'll say email from MVC email form. And then we will give it a body, which we will get from our message object. We will use the message body property. Then we will specify plain text. We don't want HTML. And then we need to specify who it's from. We also get that information from the contact message object that is passed to this method. We will use the email and the name properties. So now we just need to specify who this email is being sent to, and that's going to be us. So I will add a mail address object with my email address, asp.net.from.scratch.sample@gmail.com, and I will put my name in the display name parameter. And that's our email message. All we have to do now is send it. So we will create an SMTP client object. We'll call it server. And then we will just call the send method and pass it our email object. Alright, so this code can fail, so we do need to add a catch, and we'll just specify exceptions so that we can catch every exception. And we will change the value of the success message variable to that of the exception message. That way we can at least get some type of valuable information in case if something does go wrong. In order to send this email, we need to supply some information about our SMTP server. And the best place to do that is in the web.config file within the system.net configuration settings, which is not there. So we'll add the system.net element, then we will add the mail settings element, and then SMTP, and then network. And we need to provide the port, the host, a username, and a password. Now I'm going to input this information off screen. When we come back, we will run this and see if it works. Alright, well, while I was off screen, I went ahead and logged into my Gmail account so that we can see the results of any email that may be sent. Press F5 to run, and we will click on the Contact Me link. Let's just put in some silly information. I'll put in a name of tester, email is gibberish@whatever.com, and as a message, I hope this works. Press the button, and yay! We'll see that our message was sent. If we go to the Gmail, we will see an email there for us with all the information that we specified within our code. The name is tester. The email is gibberish@whatever.com. So everything is working pretty much like our web forms application, except we did it with MVC. Well, this is a good place to stop, so we'll just end the lesson here. From here on out, we are going to be pretty much all MVC all the time. Unless if there's something really cool in web forms or .NET in general that can be translated to the web, we're going to be in MVC. There's a lot of information to cover, a lot of cool things to cover, and especially with MVC 3 coming, there's a lot of cool things that I would like to get into. So I hope you like MVC, because that's pretty much all that the content in ASP.NET from Scratch is going to be from here on out. Well, my name is Jeremy McPeak for NetTuts. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.